Ashoka the Great, who reigned from 268 BCE until his death in 232 BCE, was the third emperor of the Maurya dynasty and the ruler of Magadha. His empire extended across much of the Indian subcontinent, from what is now Afghanistan in the west to Bangladesh in the east, with the capital at Pataliputra. A devoted patron of Buddhism, Ashoka played a crucial role in the spread of the religion throughout ancient Asia. According to the edicts of Ashoka in his 8th year of reign, around 260 BCE, he conquered the kingdom of Kalinga in a bloody war. After this devastating conflict, Ashoka turned his focus to promoting Dhamma, or righteous conduct, which became a central theme in his edicts. These inscriptions suggest that not long after the war, Ashoka was increasingly drawn to Buddhism. Buddhist texts credit him with building numerous stupas, supporting the Third Buddhist Council, aiding Buddhist missionaries, and making generous contributions to the monastic community. For much of history, Ashoka's reign was nearly forgotten. But with the discovery and decipherment of ancient inscriptions in the Brahmi script during the 19th century, he regained recognition as one of India's greatest emperors. The modern Republic of India's state emblem is based on the lion capital of Ashoka, and the Ashoka Chakra, featured in the center of India's national flag, symbolizes his enduring legacy. Information about Ashoka is primarily derived from his own inscriptions, other contemporary inscriptions from his reign, and ancient literature, particularly Buddhist texts. One notable example is Ashoka's major rock edict at Junagadh, which contains inscriptions not only by Ashoka, including 14 of his edicts, but also by later rulers, such as Rudradaman I and Skandagupta. These inscriptions are among the earliest records of imperial authority in the Indian subcontinent. However, while these texts focus predominantly on Ashoka's promotion of Dhamma, they offer little insight into other aspects of the Maurya Empire or its society. Even regarding Dhamma, the content of the inscriptions must be interpreted carefully, as they may not fully represent the complexities of Ashoka's reign. In addition to Ashoka's own inscriptions, a few other sources provide some details about him. For instance, the Junagadh rock inscription from the 2nd century CE mentions Ashoka. Another inscription, found at Sirkap, references a word beginning with Priyadari, which is speculated to be Ashoka's title Priyadarshi in Aramaic, though this remains uncertain. Much of the historical understanding of Ashoka comes from Buddhist texts, which portray him as an ideal and virtuous ruler. These texts, however, were written after Ashoka's time by Buddhist authors, and they often include narratives that highlight the transformative influence of Buddhism on Ashoka's life and rule. Ashoka's own inscriptions provide a considerable amount of detail about his reign, yet they do not mention his ancestors. Other sources, such as the Puranas and the Mahavamsa, identify his father as Bindusara, the Mauryan emperor, and his grandfather as Chandragupta, the founder of the Mauryan Empire. The Ashokavadana, a Buddhist text, also names Bindusara as his father. According to the Ashokavadana, Ashoka's mother was a Brahmin woman from Champa who was foretold to marry a king. Her father took her to Pataliputra, where she became Bindusara's chief empress. The same text also states that Bindusara sent Ashoka to suppress a rebellion in Takshashila, modern-day Bir Mound, Pakistan. Other Buddhist texts, including the Ashoka Sutra and Kunala Sutra, suggest that Bindusara appointed Ashoka as viceroy of Gandhara, where Takshashila was located, rather than sending him to Ujjain as some earlier accounts might imply. The Ashokavadana recounts that Bindusara, Ashoka's father, provided him with a fourfold army, comprising cavalry, elephants, chariots, and infantry, but notably refused to supply any weapons. Upon reaching Takshashila, Ashoka was welcomed by the citizens, who clarified that their rebellion was directed only at corrupt ministers, not against the emperor himself. Takshashila was a prosperous and strategically significant city, historically linked to the Mauryan capital of Pataliputra via the Uttarapatha trade route, reinforcing its importance by Ashoka's time. According to the Mahavamsa, Bindusara appointed Ashoka as the viceroy of Avantirastra, modern-day Ujjain district, a vital administrative and commercial region in central India. This account is supported by the Saru Maru inscription found in central India, which notes Ashoka's visit to the area as a prince. Further corroboration comes from Ashoka's own rock edicts, which mention a viceroy prince stationed at Ujjain during his reign, suggesting that Ashoka himself held this position. Sri Lankan tradition also claims that during his journey to Ujjain, Ashoka passed through Vidisha, where he fell in love with a beautiful woman. The Dipavamsa and Mahamvamsa identify her as Devi, the daughter of a merchant, while the Mahabodhi Vamsa names her Vidisha Mahadevi and traces her lineage to the Shakya clan of Gautama Buddha. According to the Mahavamsa, Devi gave birth to Ashoka's son Mahinda in Ujjain, followed by a daughter, Sanghamita, 2 years later. When Bindusara fell ill, Ashoka returned to Pataliputra from Ujjain, seized control of the capital, and after his father's death, ascended the throne. The Mahavamsa also mentions that Ashoka had his eldest brother killed, and further accounts suggest that he executed 99 of his half-brothers, including Sumana. The Dipavamsa claims that Ashoka killed 100 brothers and ascended the throne 4 years later. The Vamsattapakasini provides an additional detail, stating that an Ajivika ascetic had predicted this massacre based on a dream of Ashoka's mother. Only Ashoka's uterine brother Tissa was spared, though other sources name surviving brothers as Vitashoka, Vigatashoka, Sudatta, or Sugatra. According to the Mahavamsa and Dipavamsa, Ashoka ascended the throne 218 years after Gautama Buddha's death and ruled for 37 years. However, the date of the Buddha's death remains debated. The North Indian tradition asserts Ashoka ruled a century after the Buddha's death, leading to further discussions on the exact timeline. If the Sri Lankan tradition is accurate and the Buddha's death occurred in 483 BCE, a date supported by several scholars, Ashoka would have ascended the throne around 265 BCE. The Puranas offer an alternative, stating that Bindusara reigned for 25 years, not 28 years as suggested in the Sri Lankan tradition. If this is correct, Ashoka's ascension could be pushed back to 268 BCE. If we follow the Sri Lankan tradition, but with the assumption that the Buddha died in 486 BCE, Ashoka's ascension could still be dated to 268 BCE. The Mahavamsa also mentions that Ashoka consecrated himself as emperor 4 years after becoming sovereign, which might indicate a struggle for succession among Bindusara's sons during this period. The Ashokavadana recounts a tale about Ashoka's minister Yashas, who is said to have hidden the sun with his hand. Professor P.H.L. Egermont suggested that this story might refer to the partial solar eclipse visible in northern India on May 4, 249 BCE. According to the Ashokavadana, after witnessing the eclipse, Ashoka embarked on a pilgrimage to various Buddhist sites. One of his inscriptions at Rumandai mentions that he visited Lumbini during his 21st regnal year. If this visit was part of the pilgrimage described in the text, and Ashoka visited Lumbini a year or two after the eclipse, it would place his ascension around 268-269 BCE. Both Sri Lankan and North Indian traditions portray Ashoka as a violent ruler before his conversion to Buddhism. Taranatha further adds that Ashoka was initially called Kamashoka due to his indulgence in pleasures, kama. Later, he earned the name Chandashoka, Ashoka the Fierce, for his years of committing cruel acts. Eventually, following his conversion, he became known as Dhammashoka, Ashoka the Righteous. The Ashokavadana also refers to him as Chandashoka and recounts several of his brutal actions. The text describes how, after ascending the throne, Ashoka's ministers began to treat him with disdain. To test their loyalty, Ashoka issued an unreasonable order to cut down all the fruit-bearing and flowering trees. When the ministers failed to comply, Ashoka personally executed 500 of them. In another account, Ashoka, while strolling in a park with his concubines, came across a beautiful Ashoka tree. His mood turned amorous, but the women disliked touching the rough skin of the tree. Later, when Ashoka fell asleep, the resentful concubines cut the flowers and branches from the tree. In a furious response, Ashoka had 500 of his concubines burned alive. The king's involvement in such massacres alarmed his prime minister Radhagupta, who proposed hiring an executioner to handle future mass killings, sparing the king from direct involvement. A young village boy named Girika from Magadha, who boasted of his ability to execute anyone across the land, was hired for this role. He became known as Chandagirika, Girika the Fierce. At his request, Ashoka had a jail built in Pataliputra, which came to be known as Ashoka's Hell. The jail appeared pleasant from the outside, but inside, Girika tortured the prisoners mercilessly. The 5th century Chinese traveler Faxian reports that Ashoka personally visited the underworld to study various methods of torture, which he then applied in his own reign. The 7th century traveler Xuanzang also mentions seeing a pillar marking the site of Ashoka's hell. The Mahavamsa briefly references Ashoka's cruelty, stating that he was once called Chandashoka because of his evil deeds, but was later known as Dharmashoka due to his righteous acts after converting to Buddhism. Ashoka's inscriptions record that he conquered the Kalinga region during his 8th regnal year. The immense destruction caused by the war led him to deeply regret his violent actions, and in the following years, he turned towards Buddhism. In Edict 13 of the Edicts of Ashoka, the king expresses his profound remorse after witnessing the devastation in Kalinga. Immediately after the annexation of Kalinga, His Sacred Majesty became deeply committed to the protection and promotion of the law of piety, embracing it fully and teaching others to follow it. The king's regret arose from the violence of conquering a previously unconquered land, which resulted in the killing, wounding, and capture of many people. This was a matter of great sorrow and repentance for him. Some earlier scholars believed that Ashoka underwent an immediate and dramatic conversion to Buddhism after witnessing the war's aftermath. They pointed to Major Rock Edict 13, which suggests that he turned to the Dhamma following the Kalinga conquest. However, despite this, the epigraphic evidence indicates that his conversion was more gradual rather than an abrupt transformation. For example, in a Minor Rock Edict from his 13th regnal year, 5 years after the Kalinga campaign, Ashoka mentions that he had been a lay Buddhist, Upasaka, for over 2.5 years but had made limited progress during that time. It was only in the past year that he grew closer to the Sangha, the Buddhist community, and became a more devout follower. Ashoka's Major Rock Edict 13 confirms that he conquered Kalinga 8 years after ascending to the throne. The edict describes the immense toll the conquest took, including the deaths of 100,000 men and animals, with many more dying afterward, and the capture of 150,000 individuals from Kalinga. Ashoka notes that the sorrow from these events led him to fully embrace the practice and promotion of Dharma. He now viewed the violence, death, and displacement caused by war as deeply painful and regrettable, with the suffering of religious people and householders being even more tragic. This edict was inscribed in various locations, such as Eragudi, Girnar, Kalsi, Manishra, Shahbazgari, and Kandahar. However, it is notably absent from Ashoka's inscriptions found in the Kalinga region, where Rock Edicts 13 and 14 are replaced by 2 separate edicts that do not mention Ashoka's remorse. It is possible that Ashoka chose not to share his regret with the people of Kalinga, as it might have been politically inappropriate. Both the Mahavamsa and the Ashokavadana mention that Ashoka constructed 84,000 stupas and viharas. According to Ashoka's rock edicts, during his 8th to 9th regnal years, he made a pilgrimage to the Bodhi tree, began promoting Dharma, and engaged in various social welfare activities. These activities included setting up medical facilities for both humans and animals, planting medicinal herbs, and digging wells and planting trees along roads. Such initiatives were not limited to his own kingdom, but extended to neighboring regions, including the Cholas, Pandyas, Satyaputras, Tamraparni, and even the Greek kingdom of Antiocha. The edicts also indicate that during his 10th to 11th regnal years, Ashoka grew closer to the Buddhist Sangha and embarked on a tour of his empire that lasted at least 256 days. By his 12th regnal year, he began issuing edicts to promote Dharma. He instructed his officials to conduct inspections and spread Dharma throughout their regions every 5 years. The following year, he established the position of Dharma Mahamatra, a high-ranking officer responsible for overseeing Dharma propagation. In his 14th regnal year, Ashoka initiated the expansion of the stupa of Buddha Kanakamuni. The Sri Lankan tradition portrays Ashoka as playing an even more significant role within the Buddhist community. In this tradition, Ashoka is credited with feeding monks on a large scale, which led to an influx of fake monks into the Sangha. This caused a divide within the community, as the true Buddhist monks refused to cooperate with the impostors, resulting in a 7-year gap in the Upasatha ceremony. In an effort to rid the Sangha of these false monks, a minister's excessive zeal led to the killing of some legitimate monks. As a result, Ashoka invited the elder monk Moggalliputta Tissa to assist in purging non-Buddhists from the monastery he had established in Pataliputra. In the ensuing process, 60,000 monks accused of heresy were defrocked. With the purification complete, the Upasatha ceremony was held. and Tissa subsequently organized the Third Buddhist Council during Ashoka's 17th regnal year. Tissa also compiled the Kathavattu, a text that reinforced Theravadan orthodoxy on several key matters. In the Sri Lankan tradition, Moggaliputta Tissa, who was supported by Ashoka, sent 9 Buddhist missions to spread Buddhism in the border regions around 250 BCE. This tradition does not attribute the sending of these missions directly to Ashoka. Each mission consisted of 5 monks led by an elder. Ashoka personally sent his son Mahinda to Sri Lanka, accompanied by 4 other Theras, Ithiya, Uttiya, Sambala, and Bhattasala. In addition, with Moggaliputta Tissa's assistance, Ashoka dispatched Buddhist missionaries to distant areas, including Kashmir, Gandhara, the Himalayas, the land of the Yonas, Greeks, Maharashtra, Suvarnabhumi, and Sri Lanka. According to the 5th century Buddhist legend Ashokavadana, Ashoka continued to commit violent acts even after his conversion to Buddhism. For example, he slowly tortured Chandagirika to death in the Hell prison. He ordered the massacre of 18,000 heretics as punishment for the misdeeds of a single individual. He initiated a pogrom against the Jains, offering a bounty for the head of any heretic, which led to the beheading of his own brother Vitashoka. If you liked the video, please subscribe the channel for such fascinating videos.